Warlord Grakthal stood on the obsidian balcony of the high fortress, his scarred hands gripping the ancient stone railing as he gazed up at the bloated crimson sun. What had once been a brilliant yellow star, the life-giver of Mordak Prime, now hung in the sky like a festering wound, its surface roiling with violent solar flares that painted the perpetual twilight in shades of blood and amber. The temperature had risen 12 degrees in the past decade alone. The great ice caps of the northern continent had vanished entirely, and the once mighty rivers now ran as scalding torrents that killed any creature foolish enough to drink from them. Even the hardy orcish physiology, evolved over millennia to withstand the harsh conditions of their world, was beginning to fail under the relentless assault of their dying star. "The astronomer's calculations were correct, my lord," came a gravelly voice from behind him. Grakthal didn't turn to acknowledge Vizier Skarlog, his most trusted advisor and the keeper of Mordak Prime's scientific knowledge. The ancient orc's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty, and in it, Grakthal heard the death knell of their civilization. "How long?" Grakthal's question emerged as barely more than a growl, his massive frame silhouetted against the angry sky. 57 years, perhaps 60 if the expansion rate decreases. "But my lord," Skarlog paused, his clawed fingers nervously adjusting the crude optical instruments that hung from his belt. "The habitability threshold will be crossed much sooner. Within 30 years, perhaps 25, the surface temperature will exceed what even our people can endure. The great cities will become furnaces, and the fertile valleys will turn to ash." Grakthal's yellow eyes blazed with an inner fire that rivaled the dying star above. For 3,000 years, the Orcish clans had called Mordak Prime home. They had carved their civilization from the unforgiving stone of this world, had built mighty fortresses and sprawling cities, had domesticated the great horned beasts of the steppes, and learned to harness the power of the violent storms that swept across their continents. The thought of abandoning everything, of admitting defeat to the cosmic forces that governed the universe, sent rage coursing through his veins like molten metal. But Grakthal had not become warlord of the United Clans by allowing emotion to cloud his judgment. The mark of a true leader was the ability to make the impossible choices, to sacrifice the present for the sake of the future. He had learned this lesson in blood during the War of 7 Clans, when he had ordered the evacuation of Korthak Hold, allowing the enemy to claim his ancestral seat while saving 10,000 lives. "Summon the clan chiefs," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority that had united the fractious Orcish tribes under a single banner. "All of them. We convene the Great Council at the rise of the Crimson Dawn." Skarlog bowed deeply, his ancient bones creaking with emotion. "It shall be done, my lord, but what will you tell them?" Grakthal turned from the balcony, his massive form casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the light around him. His armor, forged from the black iron of the deep mines and inscribed with the clan marks of every tribe he had conquered or allied with, clinked softly as he moved. The great war axe strapped to his back, Bloodrender, seemed to hum with anticipation. "I will tell them the truth, old friend, that our world is dying and that we must find another." The great council chamber had not seen such an assembly in over a century. Carved from a single massive geode deep beneath the high fortress, its crystalline walls reflected and amplified the light of 100 burning torches, creating an otherworldly ambience that had witnessed the most crucial moments in Orcish history. The chamber could hold 500 beings, but tonight it felt crowded with less than half that number. Every clan chief, sub-chief, and elder who could make the journey to the fortress in time. The air was thick with tension and the acrid smell of unwashed bodies, leather, and steel. Orcs were not a naturally cooperative species. Their society was built on strength, honor, and the right of conquest. To gather so many powerful individuals in one place without bloodshed was an achievement in itself, a testament to the respect and fear that Grakthal commanded. The warlord stood at the center of the chamber, on the raised dais known as the Judgment Stone. Around him, arranged in concentric circles according to their clan's strength and standing, sat the most powerful orcs in the known galaxy. Chief Gornak of the Iron Tusks, his massive frame covered in ritual scars that told the story of 100 battles. Elder Veshka of the Storm Riders, one of the few female clan leaders, her silver hair braided with the bones of her enemies. Chief Throgmal of the Stone Breakers, whose clan controlled the deep mines that had provided the raw materials for Orcish civilization. As Grakthul began to speak, his voice echoed off the crystalline walls, carrying to every corner of the chamber. He told them of the astronomers' calculations, of the inexorable expansion of their star, of the approaching end of everything they had ever known. He spoke without emotion, presenting facts as coldly as if he were describing the weather, but those who knew him could see the storm building behind his eyes. When he finished, the chamber erupted into chaos. Shouts of denial, roars of rage, the clash of weapons as shorter tempers flared into violence. Chief Gornak leaped to his feet, his voice booming over the din. "You speak of fleeing like cowards. The Iron Tusks have never run from a fight." "This is not a fight we can win with axe and sword," Grakthul replied, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Would you have our entire race die for the sake of pride?" Elder Veshka's voice carried the authority of her years. "Even if what you say is true, where would we go? The void between stars is vast and cold. Our ships, even our greatest vessels, cannot carry enough supplies for such a journey." Vizier Skarlog stepped forward, his arms laden with star charts and astronomical calculations. "There is a way," he announced, his voice somehow carrying despite its frail quality. "Our long-range surveys have identified a system, 47 light-years distant. 3 planets orbit a stable yellow star, and one of them shows signs of life." The chamber fell silent. In the sudden quiet, the crackling of torches sounded like distant thunder. "Life?" Chief Throgmal's voice was barely above a whisper. "What manner of life?" Skarlog unrolled a large chart, its surface covered with symbols and calculations that few present could fully understand. "Our most powerful telescopes can detect atmospheric composition, temperature variations, the presence of water vapor and oxygen. The planet, we have designated it as Target 1, appears to be a garden world. Vast oceans, multiple continents, atmospheric conditions that would support our physiology." "But not uninhabited," Grakthul said, his statement carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "No, my lord. Radio emissions, regular patterns of electromagnetic radiation, orbital structures that appear artificial. The world is home to a technological civilization." The implications hung in the air like a blade poised to fall. Every orc in the chamber understood what this meant. Their own world was dying, and their only hope for survival lay in taking another world from its current inhabitants. Chief Gornak's voice cut through the silence. "Then we take it." Elder Veshka turned on him with a snarl. "Just like that. We know nothing of these beings, their numbers, their capabilities. For all we know, they could be as numerous as the stars themselves. Or they could be weak," Gornak countered. "Soft creatures who have never known true warfare, who have grown complacent in their paradise." Grakthul raised his hand, and the chamber fell silent. When he spoke, his words carried the finality of a death sentence. "We will not make this decision based on speculation. Skarlog, how long would it take to prepare a reconnaissance mission?" The ancient vizier consulted his calculations. "To build a ship capable of the journey and return. 5 years, perhaps 6. The vessel would need to be massive, capable of sustaining a crew for decades, equipped with the most advanced observation equipment we can construct." "Then we begin construction immediately," Grakthul declared. "In the meantime, we prepare for the possibility of war. Not the clan feuds and honor duels we have known, but total war. War for survival itself." Chief Throgmal stood, his voice heavy with resignation. "And if this distant world proves unsuitable, if its inhabitants are too strong or too numerous, or if the journey itself proves impossible?" Grakthul's eyes swept across the assembled chiefs, and in them they saw the terrible resolve that had made him their leader. Then we die as orcs have always died, with weapons in our hands and defiance in our hearts. But we will not die cowering in the shadows of our cooling forges, waiting for the sky to burn us to ash. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. The Great Migration would begin. 5 years later, the ship Vanguard disappeared into the void between stars, carrying a crew of 50 volunteers on a journey that would take 23 years each way. As the decades passed, the situation on Mordak Prime continued to deteriorate. Temperatures rose steadily, forcing the evacuation of equatorial cities. The great agricultural valleys that had fed the planet's population for millennia began to fail as crops withered in the increasingly hostile climate. Grakthal, now bearing the gray of advanced age in his braided hair, stood once again on the obsidian balcony. The star had grown visibly larger in the decades since the Council's decision, its angry red surface now showing distinct features. Massive solar prominences that arced thousands of kilometers into space, dark sunspots that covered areas larger than continents, coronal mass ejection that sent waves of charged particles cascading through the system. The Orcish civilization had not remained idle during the long wait. Under Grakthal's direction, the greatest minds of their species had been turned toward a single goal: preparation for exodus. The shipyards that had once built cargo vessels and mining platforms now labored day and night to construct the largest fleet in Orcish history. Not warships, for they did not yet know what they would face, but generation ships, massive vessels capable of supporting thousands of passengers for the decades-long journey to their new home. The technical challenges had been staggering. Orcish technology, evolved from their harsh world's demands, was robust but not subtle. Their ships were built like their architecture: thick armor plating, redundant systems, capable of withstanding punishment but lacking the elegance of more advanced civilizations. To design vessels capable of interstellar travel had required innovations that pushed their science to its absolute limits. Chief Engineer Moldrak, one of the finest technical minds of her generation, had solved the propulsion problem by scaling up the fusion drives used in system patrol craft. The result was a propulsion system that consumed fuel at a prodigious rate, but could accelerate the massive ships to a significant fraction of light speed. The journey that would have taken centuries with chemical rockets could be completed in just under 50 years. Life support systems presented an even greater challenge. The ships would need to provide air, water, food, and waste processing for thousands of passengers across decades of travel. Hydroponic gardens, atmospheric processors, closed-loop recycling systems, technologies that the Orcs had never needed on their planet, had to be developed from scratch. But perhaps the greatest challenge was social. Orcs were not a species accustomed to confinement. Their culture valued personal strength, individual achievement, and the freedom to settle disputes through combat. The prospect of spending decades trapped in metal corridors, with no enemies to fight and no new territories to conquer, threatened to tear their society apart from within. Grakthal had solved this problem in the most direct way possible, by giving his people a purpose that transcended their individual desires. Every Orc would have a role in the Great Migration, from the mightiest clan chief to the humblest laborer. Some would serve as crew aboard the ships, others as colonists, still others as warriors preparing for the battles that might await them in their new home. The military preparations had been particularly extensive. Grakthal had ordered the creation of the largest army in Orcish history, not to fight other Orcs, but to serve as the spearhead of conquest on their destination world. New weapons had been developed, new tactics formulated, new units trained specifically for fighting in unknown conditions against unknown enemies. The Shock Legions, elite units equipped with power armor and energy weapons, had been created to lead the initial assault. The Heavy Assault Corps would follow, massive Orcs wielding weapons capable of destroying buildings and vehicles. Support units would establish forward bases, maintain supply lines, and coordinate the conquest of their new world. But all of this preparation meant nothing if the reconnaissance mission failed to return, or if it brought back news that made the journey impossible. The answer came on a day when the red giant sun seemed to fill half the sky, its heat so intense that the very air shimmered with thermals. A sensor technician in the deep monitoring station beneath the high fortress detected the familiar electromagnetic signature of an Orcish fusion drive, still millions of kilometers away, but unmistakably approaching the system. The vanguard had returned. Commander Jarkal stepped from the shuttle onto the landing pad of the high fortress, and those who greeted him could see the weight of 46 years in his scarred face. He had been a young warrior when he departed. He returned as an elder, his hair gray, his movements stiff with age, but his eyes blazing with the fire of momentous knowledge. In the same crystalline chamber where the Great Council had made the decision to flee their dying world, Jarkal delivered his report to the assembled leadership. The images and data his ship had collected were transmitted to viewing screens around the chamber, showing the gathered chiefs and elders their first glimpse of the world that might become their new home. It was beautiful beyond anything they had imagined. Where Mordek Prime was a world of harsh stone and metal, of storm-racked skies and bitter cold, this distant planet was a paradise of blue oceans and green continents. Vast forests covered much of the landmasses, while great rivers meandered through fertile valleys. The polar ice caps were pristine white, and the atmosphere showed the clear signature of a world teeming with life. "The world they call Earth," Jarkal began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber, "is indeed a garden. The atmospheric composition is ideal for our physiology, more oxygen-rich than our own world ever was. The gravity is slightly lower, which will make us stronger and faster. The climate is temperate across much of the surface, with none of the extreme weather patterns that have shaped our evolution." Chief Gornak, now ancient but still formidable, leaned forward in his seat. "And its inhabitants," Jarkal's expression darkened, "they call themselves humans, bipedal like us but smaller and physically weaker. Their technology is sophisticated but limited. They have achieved global communication, primitive spaceflight, nuclear weapons, but nothing approaching our level of development in military science." He activated another series of images, showing human cities, human vehicles, human military installations captured by the Vanguard's long-range sensors during its careful observations. Their population is significant, approximately 8 billion individuals spread across the planet. They are divided into numerous political entities, frequently in conflict with one another. This may work to our advantage. They do not seem to possess the unity that would allow them to present a coordinated defense. Elder Veshka studied the images with the eye of a seasoned strategist. "Their military capabilities, primitive but not negligible," Jarkal replied. "They possess chemical propellant weapons, explosive devices, armored vehicles, aircraft capable of atmospheric flight, and limited orbital capabilities. Their nuclear weapons could pose a threat to our ships if we are careless, but their delivery systems are crude. Most concerning is their apparent facility with electronic warfare. Their communication and computational systems are surprisingly advanced." The chamber buzzed with conversation as the implications sank in. This was not the scenario they had hoped for, an empty world waiting for colonization. But neither was it the nightmare of facing a technologically superior civilization. The humans represented a challenge, but one that could be overcome. Grakthal stood, his aged frame still commanding despite the years. "Your recommendation, Commander." Jarkal met his leader's gaze without flinching. "The world can be taken, my lord. The humans are numerous but divided, advanced in some areas but primitive in others. A coordinated assault, properly planned and executed, could achieve victory within a matter of years rather than decades. Casualties? Significant but acceptable. I estimate we would need to deploy at least 200,000 warriors for the initial phase of conquest, with another 500,000 in support roles. Total casualties: perhaps 20 to 30% of our military forces, assuming the humans prove more resilient than their technology suggests. The numbers hung in the air like a funeral shroud. Nearly a quarter of their race would be risking their lives in the opening phases of the invasion alone. But the alternative was the extinction of their entire species. Chief Throgmol's voice carried the weariness of advanced age. And after the conquest, can we coexist with these humans? Jarkel's expression became carefully neutral. That would depend on the warlord's intentions. The planet could support both species, theoretically. But he paused, choosing his words carefully. The humans have shown themselves to be remarkably adaptable and resourceful. They recover quickly from setbacks, learn from their mistakes, and their population growth rate is significant. If we allow them to remain, we would need to ensure they never become a threat to our descendants. The implications were clear. This would not be a simple conquest followed by peaceful coexistence. It would be a struggle for the very future of both species, with the losers facing extinction. Grachthal's voice cut through the growing murmur of discussion. How long to prepare for the migration? The fleet is nearly complete, Chief Engineer Moldrak reported from her position near the chamber's entrance. 150 generation ships, capable of carrying our entire population with supplies for the journey. We can be ready to depart within 3 years. Then we have 3 years to prepare for war, Grachthal declared. Not just any war, but a war for survival itself. Commander Jarkal, you will work with our military leaders to develop detailed invasion plans. Every aspect of human society, every strength and weakness, every potential advantage we might exploit, I want it all analyzed and incorporated into our strategy. The old warlord's yellow eyes swept across the chamber, meeting the gaze of every clan chief and elder present. Make no mistake, my friends. What we contemplate is the complete conquest of another world, the displacement or destruction of an entire species. History will judge us harshly for this choice. But history will not judge us at all if we remain here to die when our star consumes our world. He paused, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, yet somehow every word carried clearly to the farthest corners of the chamber. We did not choose this fate. We did not ask for our star to die, for our world to become uninhabitable, for our only hope of survival to lie in taking another's home. But this is the hand that the universe has dealt us, and we will play it as Orcs have always played, with courage, with honor, and with absolute determination to survive. The vote, when it came, was unanimous once again. The Great Migration would become the Great Conquest. The departure of the Orcish fleet from Mordek Prime was a sight that would have awed observers from any species. 150 massive ships, each a kilometer or more in length, rising from the dying world's surface in perfect formation. The generation ships were unlike anything the Orcs had ever built before, sleek where their previous vessels had been angular, sophisticated where they had been crude, representing the absolute pinnacle of Orcish engineering and industrial capability. At the fleet's heart flew the Conquest, Grachthal's flagship and the largest ship ever constructed by Orcish hands. 3 kilometers from bow to stern, it carried not only the warlord and his staff, but also the most advanced command and control systems in the fleet, the primary military planning facilities, and the symbolic heart of Orcish civilization, the Hall of Ancestors, where the death masks of every great leader in their history were displayed in eternal honor. The ship's departure had been timed to coincide with the rise of the red giant sun, so that the fleet would be silhouetted against the bloated star as it left orbit. From the observation decks, the Orcs could see their homeworld falling away beneath them, a scarred, orange-brown sphere wreathed in the violent storms that now constantly scoured its surface. Many wept for all their fierce reputation, as they watched everything they had ever known disappear into the void. But there were no delays, no last-minute hesitations. The course had been set, the decisions made, and the future committed to irrevocably. The fleet accelerated smoothly toward the edge of the system, their fusion drives leaving brilliant trails of superheated plasma that would be visible from Mordak Prime for months to come. Gracthal stood on the bridge of the Conquest, watching the tactical displays that showed the positions of every ship in the fleet. The formation was not random. It had been carefully planned to provide mutual support and protection during the long journey. Escort vessels surrounded the larger generation ships, ready to defend against any threat they might encounter in the void between stars. Supply ships carried extra fuel, spare parts, and raw materials for the fabrication systems aboard each vessel. Hospital ships were equipped with the most advanced medical facilities available, preparing for the inevitability of illness, injury, and death during the decades-long voyage. But the most important vessels in the fleet were the military transports, 50 ships dedicated entirely to carrying the weapons, equipment, and personnel that would be needed for the conquest of Earth. These ships bore the elite of Orcish military might. The shock legions, the heavy assault corps, the armored divisions, and the specialized units that had been created specifically for the invasion of an alien world. Commander Jarkal, now bearing the title of Fleet Admiral and serving as Gracthal's strategic advisor, stood beside his leader as they watched their homeworld star dwindle to just another point of light among millions. "Any regrets, my lord?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying only to Gracthal's ears. The old warlord considered the question seriously before answering. "Many, but not about this decision. The regrets I carry are for all the things we might have done differently, all the ways we might have been better prepared for this moment. The time we wasted on clan feuds while our star grew steadily brighter. The resources we squandered on monuments to our own glory instead of investing in our future. The knowledge we failed to preserve, the technologies we never developed, the unity we achieved only when faced with extinction." He turned to face Jarkal, his weathered features lit by the soft glow of the bridge displays. "But I have no regrets about the path we have chosen. We are doing what we must to ensure our people's survival. The moral weight of that choice is mine to bear, not theirs." The journey to Earth would take 47 standard years at their maximum sustainable velocity. For a species accustomed to measuring time in seasons and the gradual change of political fortunes, it was an almost incomprehensible span. Children would be born aboard the ships who would reach middle age before they ever saw a planet's surface. Elders who had lived through the glory days of Mordek Prime would die in the cold vacuum between stars, never knowing if their sacrifice had been worthwhile. But Gracthal had planned for this. The ships were not merely vessels of transportation. They were floating cities, complete societies designed to maintain Orcish culture and values across the generations. Each ship had its own governing council, its own military hierarchy, its own economic systems. Regular communication between vessels ensured that the fleet remained unified in purpose, even as it stretched across millions of kilometers of space. The greatest challenge was maintaining military readiness across such a long period. Warriors needed to train, to hone their skills, to pass their knowledge to the next generation. Combat simulations ran constantly aboard the military vessels, using detailed models of human cities and defensive positions, constructed from the intelligence gathered by the vanguard. Young orcs born in the void between stars learned to fight as if their lives depended on it, because they did. Meanwhile, intelligence analysts continued to study every scrap of data about Earth and its inhabitants. Human communication signals, monitored continuously by the fleet's most sensitive receivers, provided an ongoing stream of information about political developments, technological advances, and social changes on the target world. By the time the fleet arrived at Earth, the Orcs would know more about human civilization than most humans knew themselves. The psychological challenges were perhaps even greater than the physical ones. Confinement aboard ship, even ships as large as the generation vessels, took its toll on a warrior species accustomed to open skies and endless horizons. Depression, anxiety, and what the ship's medical officers termed void madness affected a significant percentage of the population. Suicide rates climbed steadily during the early years of the journey, before stabilizing at levels that were manageable but still heartbreaking. Gracthal aged visibly during those years, the weight of leadership and the constant awareness of what lay ahead taking their toll on even his formidable constitution. His daily routine never varied. Briefings from the fleet's commanders, analysis of intelligence from Earth, inspection of training facilities, and time spent in the Hall of Ancestors, where he communed with the spirits of leaders who had faced their own impossible choices. It was during one of these sessions, 23 years into the journey, that Chief Medical Officer Vorthak brought him news that would change everything. "My lord," the elderly physician began, his voice heavy with exhaustion and grief, "I must report that the population projections have deteriorated significantly." Gracthal looked up from the death mask of Warlord Thrangun the Conqueror, his predecessor and the architect of the modern Orcish state. "Explain." "The birth rate aboard the ships is significantly lower than we anticipated. The stress of confinement, the artificial environment, the knowledge of what awaits us at journey's end, all of these factors are affecting reproductive success. At the same time, the death rate, particularly among the elderly, is higher than our models predicted." Vorthak consulted his data pad, his expression grim. "At current trends, we will arrive at Earth with perhaps 60% of our original population. The military units will be less affected. Their training and purpose provide psychological stability, but the civilian population is suffering severely." The implications were staggering. The invasion plans had been based on arriving at Earth with the full strength of Orcish civilization intact. A 40% reduction in population would mean a corresponding reduction in their ability to establish and maintain a foothold on the new world. "Options?" Gracthal asked, his voice betraying none of the despair that threatened to overwhelm him. "We could attempt to alter course, seek another world," Vorthak suggested, though his tone indicated he knew this was not a viable solution. "Or we could implement more aggressive measures to increase birth rates and reduce mortality, such as mandatory breeding programs, genetic selection, medical interventions to extend lifespan, psychological conditioning to improve adaptation to ship life." The medical officer's voice grew steadily quieter as he outlined each option, clearly uncomfortable with the implications. Gracthal was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the ancient death masks that surrounded him. These leaders had faced their own terrible choices, had made decisions that affected the lives of millions, had carried the weight of their people's future on their shoulders. None of them had faced a challenge quite like this, but all of them had understood the fundamental truth of leadership. Sometimes there are no good choices, only necessary ones. "Implement voluntary programs first," he decided finally. "Incentives for families, improved medical care for pregnant females, enhanced recreational facilities to improve morale. If voluntary measures prove insufficient," he paused, the words seeming to stick in his throat, "then we will consider more extreme options." But as the years passed, it became clear that voluntary measures would not be enough. The population decline continued, and with it, the viability of their mission. By the time Earth's sun became visible as more than just another star, the fleet carried barely half the population that had departed Mordak Prime. However, an unexpected factor had begun to work in their favor. The 47 years of space travel had changed the Orcs themselves. The younger generation, those born aboard the ships or who had spent most of their lives in the artificial environment of the fleet, were different from their ancestors. They were leaner, more agile, better adapted to enclosed spaces and technological environments. Their minds were sharper, more focused, better suited to the complex demands of interstellar warfare. Most importantly, they were united in a way that planet-bound Orcs had never been. The old clan rivalries, the petty feuds and honor disputes that had plagued Orcish society for millennia, had been subsumed into a single overarching purpose. Every Orc aboard the fleet, regardless of their original clan affiliation, now belonged to a single tribe. The survivors, the conquerors, the ones who would claim a new world for their species. As Earth grew from a point of light to a visible disk, as its blue oceans and white clouds became distinguishable through the fleet's telescopes, the final preparations for invasion began. The military commanders refined their plans, incorporating the latest intelligence about human defensive capabilities. The logistical specialists calculated supply requirements and established prioritized target lists. The psychological warfare experts prepared propaganda campaigns designed to undermine human morale and encourage surrender. And in the Hall of Ancestors, Gracthal added his own death mask to the collection, not because he was dead, but because he knew that the leader who had brought the fleet across the void between stars would not be the same as the one who would conquer Earth. That person would need to be harder, more ruthless, more willing to do whatever was necessary to ensure Orcish survival. The Great Migration was about to become the Great Conquest, and there would be no mercy for the weak. The human deep space monitoring station on the far side of Luna picked up the anomalous readings on a Tuesday morning, Earth Standard Time. Dr. Sarah Chen, the station's chief astronomer, had been tracking what she initially assumed was an unusual comet cluster when the object's behavior patterns began to defy conventional explanation. "Marcus, take a look at this," she called to her colleague, Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, the station's expert in stellar mechanics. "These readings don't make sense. The objects are decelerating." Rodriguez floated over to her workstation in the station's low-gravity environment, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to alarm as he reviewed the data. "That's impossible. Natural objects don't decelerate in interstellar space. Not like this." The two scientists worked feverishly for the next 6 hours, using every sensor array available to the monitoring station. What they discovered would change the course of human history forever. The objects were not comets or asteroids. They were artificial constructs, ships of enormous size and sophisticated design, approaching Earth's solar system at a significant fraction of light speed. Within hours, the discovery had been transmitted to every major space agency and government on Earth. The implications were immediate and terrifying. Humanity was about to experience first contact with an alien civilization, and that civilization was arriving in what could only be described as a war fleet. The response was swift but chaotic. The United Nations called emergency sessions. Military commands around the world went to high alert. The scientific community struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what was approaching, while governments grappled with the political and strategic implications of humanity's first encounter with non-human intelligence. Dr. Alina Kowalski, director of the European Space Agency's SETI program, found herself thrust into the center of a storm she was utterly unprepared for. In her laboratory in Geneva, surrounded by communication equipment that had spent decades listening for signals from distant stars, she stared at the data streaming in from monitoring stations around the solar system. "The fleet consists of approximately 150 vessels," she reported to the hastily assembled International Crisis Committee via secure video link. "The largest ships appear to be several kilometers in length. They're maintaining a tight formation and following a direct course toward Earth." General Patricia Morrison, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, leaned forward in her chair. "ETA, at their current rate of deceleration, 18 months, perhaps 20, they're clearly planning to enter orbit around Earth." "Weapons signatures," Dr. Kowalski hesitated. "Unknown. The ships are heavily shielded and we're analyzing them from extreme range. What we can tell is that their technology is significantly more advanced than ours. The energy signatures alone suggest power generation capabilities far beyond anything we've achieved." The next 18 months were the most intensive period of preparation in human history. Every major power on Earth contributed resources to what became known as the Unified Defense Initiative. Ancient enemies put aside their differences in the face of an existential threat to their species. Military budgets soared as humanity marshaled every available weapon system, from intercontinental ballistic missiles to laser satellite networks. But even as the military prepared for the possibility of conflict, diplomats and scientists worked frantically to establish communication with the approaching fleet. Radio signals were broadcast continuously in every language. Mathematical sequences were transmitted to demonstrate human intelligence, and cultural artifacts were prepared for potential exchange. The response, when it finally came, was not what humanity had hoped for. The transmission arrived exactly 1 year before the fleet's projected arrival at Earth. It was brief, transmitted in heavily accented but recognizable English, and delivered in a voice that carried the unmistakable tone of authority. "I am Warlord Grakthul of the Orcish clans, commander of the Great Fleet and leader of the Mordak Prime survivors. Your world has been selected for colonization by our people. You will prepare for our arrival and the transfer of planetary authority. Resistance will be met with overwhelming force. You have 1 standard year to comply." The message was repeated in 17 human languages, indicating that the aliens, Orcs, they called themselves, had been monitoring Earth's communications for some time. Analysis of the transmission revealed technological sophistication that far exceeded human capabilities, but also something else: desperation. Dr. James Patterson, a linguist from Oxford University who had been recruited for the crisis team, was the first to notice the subtle indicators. "Listen to the phrasing," he explained to the assembled experts. "This isn't the language of conquest for its own sake. Terms like survivors and colonization suggest they're refugees as much as invaders. They need our world, which means they might be willing to negotiate rather than simply destroy us." It was a thin hope, but the only one humanity had. The reply, when it was finally agreed upon after months of debate, was crafted with extraordinary care. It acknowledged the Orcs' technological superiority while asserting humanity's right to exist, proposed a sharing of resources rather than surrender, and requested a meeting to discuss terms. Grakthul's response was swift and uncompromising. "There will be no negotiation. Prepare for our arrival." But even as the official communications remained hostile, back-channel intelligence operations revealed more about the Orcish fleet. Long-range observations showed ships that, while technologically advanced, bore signs of damage and wear that suggested a long journey. Power signatures fluctuated in ways that indicated mechanical problems. Most telling of all, the fleet's population estimates, based on heat signatures and communication traffic, suggested numbers far smaller than the size of their ships would indicate. The Orcs were not the overwhelming force they wanted humanity to believe. They were survivors, refugees from a dying world, desperate enough to travel across interstellar space to claim a new home. This knowledge changed everything about humanity's defensive strategy. When the Orcish fleet finally entered Earth's solar system, they found humanity ready for them, not with surrender, but with the largest military buildup in human history. Every orbital station had been converted into a fortress. The moon bristled with weapons installations. Mars colonies had been evacuated and their facilities converted into forward military bases. Earth itself was surrounded by a network of defensive satellites, automated weapon platforms, and manned battle stations. But the most important preparation had been psychological. Humanity had spent 18 months coming to terms with the fact that they were not alone in the universe, and that their first contact with alien intelligence was likely to be violent. The species that had once fought wars over territorial disputes and ideological differences had found unity in the face of extinction. The final message from Earth to the approaching fleet was broadcast on all frequencies, in all languages, and carried the collective voice of 8 billion human beings. "We are humanity. This is our world, our home, the birthplace of our species and the foundation of our civilization. We do not seek war, but we will not surrender. If you come in peace, you will find welcome. If you come as conquerors, you will find resistance." The choice is yours. Grachthal's response would echo across both species for generations to come. Then we choose conquest. Prepare to die well. The stage was set for a war that would determine the fate of two civilizations and the future of an entire world. The first shots of the interspecies war were fired at 3:47 hours, Earth Standard Time, when the Orcish fleet crossed the orbit of Mars. The aging research station on Phobos, hastily converted into a forward observation post, detected the launch of what appeared to be reconnaissance probes from the alien ships. When these probes failed to respond to hail attempts and began active scanning of human defensive positions, the station commander made the decision that would begin the conflict. The antimatter torpedo that destroyed the lead Orcish probe lit up the Martian sky like a brief new sun. Within minutes, the probe's destruction was detected by sensors throughout the solar system, and the message flashed to every human military installation. The war had begun. Grachthal stood on the bridge of the conquest, watching the tactical displays with the calm of a veteran warrior who had seen the beginning of countless battles. The loss of the probe had been expected. The humans had shown themselves to be technologically sophisticated, if primitive by Orcish standards. What mattered now was their response to the demonstration of Orcish power that would follow. "Deploy the Thunder Wings," he commanded, his voice carrying easily through the vast bridge. "Target the orbital installations first. I want their defensive networks degraded before we begin the final approach." The Thunder Wings were the elite of Orcish aerospace forces, sleek fighter craft capable of operating in both space and atmosphere, equipped with weapons that could penetrate even the heaviest armor. They launched from the fleet's carrier vessels, in formations that had been perfected through decades of training during the long journey from Mordak Prime. But the humans were ready for them. The Battle of the Outer System, as historians would later call it, raged for 72 hours across the space between Mars and Earth. Human defensive platforms, armed with particle beam weapons and antimatter missiles, traded fire with Orcish fighters and assault craft in running battles that covered millions of kilometers. The automated defense networks that humanity had spent 18 months constructing proved more effective than even their designers had hoped, destroying nearly 40% of the attacking Orcish forces before being overwhelmed. But the Orcs had advantages that human technology could not match. Their weapons were more powerful, their armor stronger, their tactics honed by millennia of warfare. Most importantly, they had the advantage of desperation. They were fighting not for territory or ideology, but for the very survival of their species. Admiral Sarah Kim, commanding the human defense fleet from the battle cruiser Defiance, watched her tactical displays with growing concern as the Orcish advance continued. Her forces were fighting bravely, but they were being steadily pushed back toward Earth's orbital zone. The enemy ships, despite their obvious age and the damage they had sustained during their interstellar journey, were proving remarkably resilient. "Status report," she demanded, her voice tight with controlled tension. "We've lost 60% of the outer perimeter," reported Commander Zhang, her tactical officer. "The automated platforms are being systematically eliminated. The Orcs are concentrating their fire on our command and control nodes. They're trying to blind us." "What about the moon bases?" "Lunar Command reports ready status on all primary batteries." "But Admiral," Zhang paused, consulting his displays. "The preliminary bombardment was just the beginning. Long-range sensors are detecting massive energy buildups in the primary Orcish vessels. They're preparing for something big." Admiral Kim nodded grimly. The intelligence estimates had suggested that the Orcs would attempt to achieve orbital superiority before beginning their invasion of Earth's surface. The question was whether humanity's defenses could inflict enough damage to make them reconsider their strategy. The answer came at 16:23 hours on the third day of battle, when the Orcish fleet launched what could only be described as a demonstration of power. A coordinated bombardment from 20 of their largest ships struck the abandoned Mars research facility at Olympus Mons. the impact visible from Earth despite the vast distance. When the energy dissipated, the facility and the mountain itself had been reduced to a crater of molten rock. The message was unmistakable: surrender now or face the complete destruction of Earth's surface. Humanity's response was equally clear. Every available weapon system fired simultaneously at the Orcish fleet, a coordinated barrage that lit up the space between Earth and its attackers like a constellation of dying stars. The assault lasted for 17 minutes and consumed nearly 30% of Earth's total military ordnance reserves. When the energy signatures finally faded, the Orcish fleet was still there, damaged, with several ships clearly disabled but still functional and still approaching Earth. The demonstration of human resolve had cost the defenders dearly while achieving little more than proving their determination to fight to the bitter end. Gracthal surveyed the damage reports from his fleet commanders with the analytical mind of a strategist who had spent his entire life preparing for this moment. The humans had surprised him with their ferocity and technological capability, but the outcome had never been in doubt. His forces still outnumbered the human fleet by a significant margin, and their ships were designed to withstand punishment that would destroy any human vessel. More importantly, the humans had revealed the full extent of their defensive capabilities. The orbital fortresses, the automated weapon platforms, the mined asteroid fields, all of it had been documented by Orcish sensors during the running battle. Now he could plan the final assault with complete knowledge of what he faced. "Casualties?" he asked Fleet Admiral Jarkal, who had been coordinating the attack from the fleet's tactical center. "Lighter than expected, considering the intensity of their response. We've lost 37 fighters, 8 assault craft, and 1 destroyer. The Crusher took heavy damage but remains operational. Total casualties are approximately 400 personnel." It was a remarkably light toll for such an intensive engagement, testament to the superiority of Orcish technology and tactics. But Gracthal knew that the real test was yet to come. Taking control of orbital space was one thing. Successfully invading and conquering a defended planet was another entirely. "Begin Phase 2, he ordered. "I want landing zones secured within 48 hours. Target their population centers, but avoid excessive collateral damage. We're going to need those cities intact." The invasion of Earth began with a sound that no human being had ever heard before: the screaming roar of Orcish dropships entering the atmosphere at hypersonic speeds. They came in waves, hundreds of armored vessels carrying the elite assault forces that would establish the beachheads for the main invasion. Behind them followed larger transports carrying heavy equipment, armored vehicles, and the supplies needed to sustain a planetary conquest. The first landing sites were chosen with tactical precision, major population centers where human resistance would be strongest, but also where the psychological impact of defeat would be greatest. New York, London, Tokyo, Beijing, Moscow, the greatest cities of human civilization found themselves under assault by an alien force that fought with weapons beyond their comprehension. But humanity did not surrender easily. In every city, in every town, in every place where Orcish forces landed, they met fierce resistance from human military units, police forces, and civilian volunteers who had spent 18 months preparing for this moment. The battles were brutal and one-sided, but they demonstrated something that surprised the Orcish commanders. Humans were willing to die rather than submit to conquest. The Battle of Manhattan became the symbol of human resistance. For 6 days, the defenders held out against overwhelming odds, turning every building into a fortress, every street into a killing ground. The Orcish assault forces, accustomed to the honor-based warfare of their homeworld, found themselves facing an enemy that used tactics they considered dishonorable but undeniably effective. Improvised explosives, sniper attacks, booby traps, and ambushes that turned the urban environment into a deadly maze. When the battle finally ended, the human defenders were dead to the last man and woman, but they had inflicted casualties on the Orcish forces that shocked the invasion commanders. An entire regiment of Shock Legion troops had been destroyed in the rubble of Lower Manhattan, and the survivors spoke in hushed tones of an enemy that fought like demons, even when facing certain death. Similar scenes played out across the globe as humanity's defenders made the Orcs pay dearly for every victory. The invasion succeeded. It had to, given the overwhelming technological superiority of the attacking forces, but it succeeded at a cost that no Orcish planner had anticipated. 3 months after the first landings, Gracthal stood in the ruins of what had once been the United Nations headquarters in New York, now serving as the command center for the Orcish occupation forces. Around him, the greatest city in human history lay partially in ruins, its skyscrapers scarred by weapons fire, its streets filled with the debris of war. But it was still recognizably a city, still functioning after a fashion, still home to millions of human beings who had survived the conquest and now lived under Orcish rule. The complete destruction that many had predicted had not come to pass, not because the Orcs lacked the capability, but because they needed the human infrastructure intact. "Status report," he requested from Colonel Grimthak, the officer he had placed in charge of the North American occupation zone. "Resistance continues in approximately 40% of the conquered territories," the colonel reported, his scarred face bearing the marks of the bitter fighting that had characterized the invasion. "Human guerrilla forces are operating in most major population centers. They lack the weapons to seriously threaten our forces, but they're disrupting supply lines and making occupation significantly more difficult than anticipated. Casualties. Total losses since the beginning of the invasion are approaching 30,000 personnel, nearly 15% of our total military force. The humans are proving remarkably persistent." Gracthal nodded slowly. The casualty figures were within acceptable parameters, but they were at the high end of the pre-invasion estimates. More concerning was the ongoing resistance. The Orcs had expected human organized military resistance to collapse within weeks of the initial landings. Instead, they found themselves facing a species that seemed incapable of accepting defeat. "Recommendations." Colonel Grimthak consulted his tactical pad. "We could implement more aggressive pacification measures, increase the penalty for resistance activities, expand the detention camps, implement collective punishment for entire population centers where guerrilla activity is detected." The suggestions hung in the air between them, unspoken implications filling the silence. Both officers knew that such measures would be effective. The Orcs had the capability to crush human resistance through sheer brutality if they chose to do so. But they also knew that such actions would fundamentally change the nature of their conquest, transforming them from conquerors into occupiers of a dead world. "Not yet," Gracthal decided finally. "Continue with the current approach. We came here to claim a new home, not to rule over ashes and graveyards. The humans will adapt to our presence, given time." But even as he spoke the words, Gracthal wondered if he truly believed them. The humans had already demonstrated a capacity for resistance that surprised even his most pessimistic advisors. How long would it take for that resistance to evolve into something more dangerous? And what would the Orcs be forced to do to maintain their hold on their new world? The answers to those questions would shape the future of two species and determine whether Earth would become a shared world or a monument to the cost of survival. 5 years had passed since the invasion, and Earth bore the scars of conquest like badges of honor and shame. The great cities still stood, but they were changed. Orcish architecture now dominated their skylines as the conquerors established their seat of power. The humans who remained lived in a world transformed, some in resistance, others in reluctant cooperation, all adapting to a reality they had never imagined. Gracthal, now bearing the title of planetary governor, stood on the observation deck of the former Empire State Building, which had been converted into the primary Orcish administrative center for the North American territories. Below him, the streets of New York teemed with life, both human and Orcish. The two species had begun to coexist, not in harmony, but in the complex relationship between conqueror and conquered. The integration had not been peaceful. The first 2 years after the invasion had seen constant violence as human resistance groups fought a guerrilla war against the occupation forces. But gradually, inevitably, the reality of Orcish technological superiority and the exhaustion of human military resources had forced both sides toward accommodation. Some humans had collaborated from the beginning, recognizing that cooperation offered better prospects for survival than resistance. These individuals now served in the provisional governments that administered human population centers under Orcish oversight. They were despised by many of their own species, but they provided the bridge between two civilizations that needed to learn to share a world. Others had retreated to remote areas, forming communities that existed on the margins of Orcish control. The occupation forces could have eliminated these settlements if they chose, but Grakthul had decided that some level of human autonomy was preferable to the constant drain of resources required for total suppression. The most significant change, however, was among the young. Human children born after the invasion grew up in a world where orcs were simply another fact of life, while young orcs who had spent their entire lives aboard the generation ships adapted to planetary life with remarkable ease. The first generation of Earth-born orcs and post-invasion humans would face challenges that neither of their species had ever imagined. Dr. Sarah Chen, the astronomer who had first detected the Orcish fleet, now served as humanity's chief liaison to the occupation government. It was a position she had never sought, but her scientific background and her role in First Contact had made her one of the few humans that the Orcish leadership trusted. The agricultural integration projects are showing promising results, she reported to Grakthul during one of their regular briefings. Orcish farming techniques adapted to Earth conditions are producing crop yields 20% higher than our traditional methods. The food distribution problems should be resolved within another year. Grakthul nodded, his ancient features bearing the weight of years and responsibility. The old warlord had aged considerably since the invasion, the stress of governing a conquered world proving more challenging than leading a military campaign. And the resistance activities, Dr. Chen's expression darkened slightly, declining but not eliminated. The Freedom Coalition still operates in most major cities, and there have been 3 significant attacks on Orcish facilities this month. However, support for violent resistance is decreasing as the benefits of cooperation become more apparent. It was the delicate balance that defined their new world. The Orcs had the power to crush human resistance entirely, but doing so would destroy the very civilization they had come to claim. The humans had the numbers and local knowledge to make occupation impossible, but lacked the technology to drive the invaders from their world. Both species were trapped in a relationship neither had chosen but both had to navigate. There is another matter, Dr. Chen continued, her voice carrying a note of reluctance. The monitoring stations have detected radio signals from the direction of the former Orcish homeworld. If our analysis is correct, there may be other survivors. Grakthul's reaction was immediate and intense. His yellow eyes blazed with an emotion that Dr. Chen had rarely seen in the stoic leader. Hope. How many? Unknown. The signals are faint and fragmented. It could be automated distress beacons from disabled ships, or it could indicate another fleet. We estimate at least 18 months before we could determine the source definitively. The implications were staggering. If other Orcish survivors existed, if another fleet was approaching Earth, it would fundamentally change the balance of power that had evolved since the invasion. The humans who had begun to accept Orcish rule might see new hope for liberation, while the Orcs might face the challenge of sharing their new world with even more of their own kind. But it also represented something else. The possibility that the Orcish species would survive, that their long journey from a dying world to a new home would ultimately succeed. For Grakthul, who had carried the weight of his people's survival for decades, It was a prospect that justified every sacrifice, every difficult decision, every compromise with his own conscience. As the sun set over the transformed city, casting long shadows through the alien spires that now dominated its skyline, both species faced an uncertain future. The Great Migration from Mordek Prime had ended, but the story of two civilizations learning to share a single world was just beginning. Children played in parks where human and orcish architecture stood side by side. Scientists from both species worked together to solve the challenges of integrating two completely different approaches to technology and society. Artists and philosophers struggled to understand what it meant to be human or orcish in a world where both species were minorities. The humans displaced in their own homeland, the orcs forever separated from theirs. The future would bring new challenges, new conflicts, and new opportunities for both species. The signals from deep space might herald the arrival of friends or enemies, salvation or catastrophe. But whatever came next, Earth would face it as the home of two civilizations that had learned, through necessity and suffering, that survival sometimes required not just strength and courage, but the wisdom to know when conquest must give way to coexistence. In the end, the Great Migration had become something neither species had expected. Not just the survival of the orcs or the conquest of humanity, but the birth of something entirely new, a world where the future would be written by both conqueror and conquered, working together to ensure that neither would face extinction alone. The last light of the alien sun faded from Earth's sky, and in the gathering darkness, two species dreamed of tomorrow.